Okay, we're up to 4 lines into the page. The last word on the line is michti. The Gemara is a kasha like this. We were trying to figure out that how do I know that Kiddushin is not toifis by chayve krisus? So we had 2 psukim regarding achaisisha, that lo yikach and acherim. One is to tell you l'chachila that you can't marry your achaisisha. Second is that it's not toifis by achaisisha. And then we learn that all arayis from achayis isha. The last thing the Gemara said though is, what about a nida? Nida is also chayiv kares. And whereas a nida is the exception. So you have achayis isha, Kiddushin is not typhus, and we learn that everything from achayis isha. Nida, Kiddushin is typhus. So the Gemara asked the obvious question, which is, instead of learning everything out from achayis isha to be machmer, why not compare all arayis to nida? The Kiddushin is typhus, right? You got a choice to draw it to one or draw it to the other. You got nida on one side, achaisisha on the other. Why are we all going towards achaisisha to say that Kiddushin is not taifis? Why not say that nida? And nida is the exception. Maybe nida is the rule, and achaisisha is the exception. The Gemara says michti ikala kushe lenida. You could compare all arayas to nida to say that Kiddushin is taifis. V'ikala akshes achaisisha, or you could compare everything to achaisisha. Kiddushin is not taifis. My chaz is to makshes la achaisisha ikshel nida. So why are you comparing everything to achaisisha and say that Kiddushin is not taifis? Why not compare everything to nida that Kiddushin is taifis? So the Gemara gives a very simple answer: kula v'chumra l'chumra makshinan. If you have a choice to be makish, l'kula or l'chumra, and especially dealing with arayis, we're going to be machmer. So yeah, it makes more sense to treat all the arayis in a strict way and compare it to achaisish than compare it to nida and find the kula. So therefore, the Torah is going to be machmer and say Kiddushin is not taifis by all chayve krisis. So again, the question was, how do I know that chayve krisis Kiddushin is not taifis? The answer is we learn it out from achaisisha. The Gemara now gives a second answer. Rav Acha bar No, this is Daras. This is Psukim. This is Daras. This is Hekesh. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar Aiseh b'Kal v'Chayim. He says, I have a different source that Kiddushin is not typhus by Chayve Krisus, and it's learned out from a Kal v'Chayim. What's the Kal v'Chayim? The pasuk says Yavama shehi balav litafsi b'Kiddushin. The pasuk says that a Yavama, a woman waiting yibam, right? She's not allowed to marry anybody else. Now that's a lav. That's called Yavama l'shuk. Yibam l'shuk. That's a lav. The pasuk specifically says regarding a woman waiting yibam that if she tries to marry other people, although it's just a lav, and normally Kiddushin is taifis by a lav, the marriage is not valid. The pasuk says Loi siya eishes hameza chutz l'ishzar. Loi siya. There is no Kiddushin for such a woman. So this is a lav that has Kiddushin not being taifis, which, by the way, the Gemara is going to ask in a moment, then why is generally Kiddushin taifsin by lav, and why not we learn out from Yavam l'shuk? But let's put that aside. The point is, a Yavam l'shuk is just a losase. It's no kares, right? If you marry a woman waiting to do yibam, you are over a losase, nothing more than that. It's a losase, and Kiddushin is not tofis. So if Kiddushin is not tofis by a losase, kal v'chaymer, Kiddushin is not tofis by chayve krisus. So this is the second source that Kiddushin is not tofis from chayve krisus, and that it's a kal v'chaymer. If Kiddushin is not tofis by yivama l'shuk, which is just a lav, kal v'chaymer, it's not tofis when it's trying to marry your own mother or your own daughter, which is chayve krisus. Okay, the Gemara says kal v'chaymer, ma yivama shiba lav leitavsi ba Kiddushin, chayve misas v'chayve krisus like kol shekain. Okay, beautiful. So okay, here's the problem though. That's fine. You're telling me, in general, the rule is, I just want to make this clear so that we'll understand this. Chayve lavin, outside of Rav Akiva, chayve lav Kiddushin is taifus, which means if an almana goes to a kain gadol, or a kain goes to a grusha, and says, Harei mekadesh sleep at tavas gudas me'eshim Yisrael, they were over a loisase, but the marriage is valid. She's a married woman. Kiddushin is not taifus by chayve krisus. What's the source? According to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, the source is as follows: when a woman waiting yibam wishes just Allah to say Kiddushin is not taifus, kavachomer chayve krisus. So the Gemara says, well, if you found a losa say that Kiddushin is not taifus, why is generally the rule that Kiddushin is taifus by a losa say? Why don't we learn out from Yavam l'shuk? Ihachi shar chayve lav and nami. Said, how come? How do you know that the average lav Kiddushin is tofis? Why not learn it out from Yavam l'shuk? So the Gemara says, Amrav Papa. Meaning, in other words, what is the source that Kiddushin is tofis by chayve lavin? We have a chayve lavin that Kiddushin is not tofis. That's Yavam l'shuk. Now you could say that that's the exception. Fine, but then what's the source that Kiddushin is tofis by chayve lavin? So the Gemara says, Chayve lavin behed yiksebu. There's a clear pasuk that the Kiddushin is taifis by the average chayve lavin. Why? Because the pasuk says, Ki siena le'ishtei nashim. A man has 2 wives. Ha'achasuva v'achasinua. One that he loves and one that he hates. Now, when you read the pasuk on a simple level, you just say it's so he doesn't like his wife. But the Gemara understands that if the Torah writes that he despises her, it means it's a marriage the Torah despises. Let me just speak it outside. It means he has two wives. One is the one that he loves, not that he loves, it's the Torah loves that wife, and one is the Torah hates, meaning it's a lav. And the pasuk says ki siena, it's a marriage. So you see the Torah is saying that even if it's a marriage that the Torah despises, meaning it's a lo saseh, ki siena, there's a marriage. But the Torah is going to describe a woman as despised. So what does she do to be despised? She's not funny, or she burns her food. That's not a reason for the Torah to describe her as a senua. Because it means that it's a marriage that the Torah despises, which means it's a lo saseh. And the pasuk says, I recognize this marriage. So this is the source that chayve lav in Kiddushin is taivus. Now, by the way, the Gemara in a little bit is going to ask a kasha, which is, all the pasuk says is that it's a marriage the Torah despises. We assume it's chayve lav, and maybe it's a chayve aseh. Meaning, why go all the way to lo saseh, right? There's different categories of averis. There's the worst, which is krisus and misas bezdin. We're not going to go that far. Then there's a lo saseh, which is pretty bad. And then the worst thing is a bittul aseh. Right? Bittul aseh. So, how do you know that it's not a bittul aseh? Like, how do you know that the pasuk is going so far as to say that it's a lo saseh? We'll get to that in a second. Ulu Rav Akiva, now here's the problem. Right now we have a source that Kiddushin is typhus by a lo saseh. Why? Because the pasuk says, Ki siena le'ishteina shema achasuva v'achasinua. One is a lo saseh, and the pasuk says that it's a marriage. Who disagrees with this concept? Rav Akiva. Rav Akiva famously feels that Chayve krisis misas bezdin, Kiddushin is not taifus, makes a mamzer. Chayve lavin, Kiddushin is not taifus, makes a mamzer. And by the way, as we'll see in a moment, machlokes what Rav Akiva would say about chayve aseh. We said it was a machlokes Rav Yeshevov. How you understand Rav Yeshevov? The point is, though, according to Rav Akiva, Kiddushin is not taifus by a lo saseh either. So what is this pasuk talking about? It can't be talking about a lo saseh because the pasuk is saying, I recognize this marriage. Rav Akiva does not recognize the marriage of a lo saseh. He feels Kiddushin is not tofus. So what is this pasuk referring to? Ulu Rav Akiva, Damar Kiddushin taifus chayve lavin. According to Rav Akiva, that a marriage from chayve lavin is not a marriage. Ki siena b'may mukala. What is the pasuk referring to? Because the pasuk is saying there is a marriage that we recognize that's senua. It can't be krisus. It can't be misas bezdin. It can't be a lo saseh. So the Gemara says, Amar l'kayin gadol. It is a lo saseh, but there's one lo saseh that Rav Akiva says Kiddushin is tofus. One lo saseh, and that's an almana to a kayin gadol. That's what it's referring to. Why is this the exception? Meaning, generally, Rav Akiva feels that Kiddushin is not tofus by a lo saseh. Which, by the way, I understand that Rav Akiva's point is, if the Torah doesn't want you to get married, and we don't accept the marriage of a krisus, so why would we accept the marriage of a lo saseh? So he says he's out. But there's one lo saseh that Rav Akiva recognizes, and that's an almana to a kayin gadol. Why? The Gemara says, Krav Simai, as Rav Simai explained, that's the exception. The Tanya Rav Simai Omer, Min Akol Rav Akiva oisem mamzer. Rav Akiva feels every prohibited marriage makes a mamzer. Kiddushin is not taifus, chutz mi almana l'kayin gadol, except for a widow marrying a kayin gadol. Why? Although it's a lo saseh, it's the only exception. Shari Amr Torah lo yechalel, because the pasuk when it describes that marriage, it says lo yechalel. You're going to make sure that if you marry, the kids are not going to be kohanim. Meaning the implication is no mamzeris. It is a marriage. It's just going to make the kids disqualified from kahuna. Chalul and oisev and oisev mamzeris. So according to Rabbi Akiva, again, we're trying to figure out what is this pasuk referring to when it says there is a marriage that the Torah does not endorse. It is a marriage though, so we say chayve lavin. The problem is Rabbi Akiva holds chayve lavin Kiddushin is not taifus. The answer is it's almana l'kayin gadol. Here's the problem: this assumption that Rabbi Akiva has that in the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, an almana l'kayin gadol is the exception is not universally accepted. The problem is Elu Rabbi Yeshevov. Rabbi Yeshevov disagrees. He says, "Boy v'nitzavech al Akiva ben Yosef." We should protest Akiva ben Yosef Shaya Omer because he used to say, "Kol she'ein le'biyah b'Yisrael." Every prohibited marriage have vlad mamzer. Meaning, according to Rabbi Yeshevov, almana l'kayin gadol is also Kiddushin is not taifus. So we're trying to figure out what is this pasuk referring to. It can't. Again, the pasuk is referring to a scenario where the Torah does not like the marriage, but it's a valid marriage b'diavad. Can't be krisus, can't be misas bezdin, can't be chayve lavin, and according to Rabbi Yeshevov, it can't be almana l'kayin gadol either. So I'll tell you what it could be: chayve aseh, meaning it's a marriage that the Torah does not want, but it's not a lo saseh. It's your mevatel and aseh. I'll give you an example of one of those. A man marries a mitzris, a mitzri convert, first 3 generations. You're not over a lo saseh. You're mevatel and aseh. You're losing out on the opportunity to do a mitzvah. So that's a Rabbi Akiva. Meaning, according to Rabbi Yeshevav, you'll have to say that Rabbi Akiva feels Krisas, Misas Bezdin, Losa Se Alman L'Kohen Gadol Kiddushin is not Taifus, makes a mamzer. What is this pasuk referring to? Chai ve'aseh. Here's the problem. There's a machlokes whether Rabbi Yeshevav would say, according to Rabbi Akiva, a Chai ve'aseh makes a mamzer. Meaning, you're assuming that according to Rabbi Yeshevav, Krisas, Misas Bezdin, Losa Se Alman L'Kohen Gadol, mamzer, Kiddushin not Taifus. Okay? Chai ve'aseh, not a mamzer, Kiddushin Taifus. That's the machlokes of what Rabbi Yeshevav meant. Because Rabbi Yeshevav's lashon is according to Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef, every prohibited marriage. The question is, did Rabbi Yeshevav include chai ve'aseh as well? According to one version of Rabbi Yeshevav, yes. If you go with that version of Rabbi Yeshevav, then what is the pasuk referring to when it says that it's a marriage we don't want, but it's still a marriage? It can't be krisus, misas bezdin, lo saseh, amar l'kohen gadol, or aseh. So what else is there? According to one version of Rabbi Yeshevav. So the Gemara speaks it out. If you understand that Rabbi Yeshevav is just disagreeing with Rav Simai, but he believes that a chai ve'aseh is a marriage, so you'll say that pasuk is talking about a chai ve'aseh. Ella itayme denavshe kamer. But if you feel Rabbi Yeshevav is across the board, chai ve'aseh is also out. Afilu chai ve'aseh is a mamzer, and kedushin is not taifus, but my mukimla. So what is the pasuk referring to? So the answer is Bibula Kohen Gadol. It's referring to one chai ve'aseh, meaning, according to this version of Rav Yeshevav, Rav Akiva feels that it's a mamzer and kedushin is not taifus from krisus, misas bezdin, lo saseh, aman Kohen Gadol, and chai ve'aseh, except for one. There's one exception, and that's a Kohen Gadol marrying a woman who's not a virgin. The halacha is that there's a mitzvah aseh for an almana, for a Kohen Gadol to marry a woman who's a basula. If he marries a girl who's not a basula, you're just mevatel and aseh, and this is the only chai ve'aseh that does not make a mamzer. It's the exception. Why? So the Gemara says, "Bebula kohen gadol." Why is this the exception? Meaning, generally, according to Rabbi Akiva, chai ve'aseh is kedushin not toifus and makes a mamzer, except for bula kohen gadol. The reason why it doesn't make a mamzer is because it's an aseh that does not apply to everyone. According to Rabbi Yeshevav, there's only a mamzer for an aseh if it's across the board. Amana to a Ba'ula only applies to Kohen Gadol to a Ba'ula only applies to a Kohen Gadol. It doesn't apply to any other Jew. Therefore, because it's an aseh that does not apply to any other Jew, Rabbi Yesheva feels that will not make a mamzer.
And the Almana?
Almana, that's a los aseh. He's talking about aseh. The only aseh, bittul aseh, that does not make a mamzer is a bittul aseh that's not universally applicable. Okay, fine. Now here's one last kasha. So we have this pasuk that says, which means the Torah is saying this is a marriage we hate, but it's a marriage. So how did we interpret it? We said it's talking about lo sases, chai ve'lavin, and this is the source of chai ve'lavin is kedushin typhus. What does Rav Akiva interpret it? He has to interpret it chai ve'aseh. So the question is, how did the Rabbanan know Rav Akiva is wrong? Right, the Rabbanan are using this pasuk to say that it's chai ve'lavin, it's kedushin is typhus. According to Rav Akiva, how do you interpret it? Chai ve'aseh. How do you? So the Rabbanan should also say it's chai ve'aseh. What's wrong with Rav Akiva that the Rabbanan are saying you're wrong? It must be lo saseh. How do they know that? So the Gemara says ulo Rabbanan admuki b'chai ve'lavin nukmi b'chai ve'aseh. The answer is because the Rabbanan feel that there's a problem here. The pasuk says a guy has two wives. One is loved, one he hates. Rav Akiva is interpreting it by chai ve'aseh. You know what the problem with this? What is the case exactly? So the Gemara says, "Hani chai ve'aseh ma'ni." What exactly is the case? Ishteim mitzriyos. Now you'll say again, chai ve'aseh. One of the chai ve'asehs is you marry a mitzri convert. So these two wives are both mitzri converts. The problem is that it's not achas ahuva and achas sinua. It's shneihem sinua, right? It's not achas one meaning these two wives. One is loved, one's hated. What's the case? So it can't be that they're both mitzris, because then they're both hated. So you'll say, one's a mitzris and one's a regular Jewess. The problem is, that means they're coming from two different nations. The implication of the pasuk is that they're the same type of woman, just one's loved, one's hated. You now have to tell me that one's a convert and one's not a convert. That's such a weird ukimta. Chazal said, you know what, it makes more sense? They're both loisases. Meaning they're both regular women, one's a loisase, one's not. But they're both at least from the Jewish people. The Gemara says, if one of them is a Mitzri convert and one is a regular Jewish, they that you tell me the entire pasuk has to be talking about a case where one converted? It can't be talking about a case within the Jewish people. It must be, therefore, miksiv kisiyana and ibeula kain gadol, and if it's a bula kain gadol, miksiv kisiyana kain. The pasuk doesn't say kain, and therefore, because of this, they felt that the pasuk cannot be interpreted chayv aseh. It must be just talking about a lois aseh. Okay, meaning 2 wives to 1 kain. One's a divorcee, one's not. Easy. As opposed to going on to one's a mitzvah's convert and one's a Jew. That's such a weird account. That's Chazal said. Now, Rav Akiva interpreted it in a weird way. For Rav Akiva, Bal Karcha, Shavki L'Krad, Havidayik, Umoik Menashe. Rav Akiva had no choice. Rav Akiva Lishitase holds that Kiddushin is not Toifis on Chayvi Lavin. Therefore, the pasuk had to be. You're right. Meaning, if you're just like rewriting, if you have no prior information and you're rewriting this pasuk, it fits better with Chayvi Lavin. But Rav Akiva holds Chayv Elav and Kiddushin is not Taifus, so he can't interpret it that way. So he's forced to interpret it in a Daichik way. But the Rabbanon who feel that Kiddushin could be Taifus and Chayv Elavin have no problem interpreting it better. That's the explanation. Okay, very simple from here until the end of the daf. Very, very pleasant, very nice, and that is to try to figure out what is the source that we all know this. That when you have a non-Jewish, right, one parent is Jewish, one parent is not Jewish. So are you a Jew? We always say you go by the mom. If the mom's a guy, the kid's a guy. The mom's a Jew, the kid's a Jew. How do you know that? That's basically what we're going to say. We said in the Mishnah that an example where Kiddushin is not typhus by anybody, then the halacha is, then you go by the mom. And that's by a guy. Right? The last case of the Mishnah, that Havlad Kamaisa, that you go by the mom when it comes to a guy. So the Gemara says, Shivcha Kananis Minon. Now there's different types of goyim, right? There's a regular goy, and then there's a non-Jewish slave woman. Now a non-Jewish slave woman is still a non-Jew, but she's more in the Jewish process. She's like in the process of converting. So how do I know that if a Shivcha Kananis, the Kiddushin is not typhus, and the children are like her? Those are the 2 things we have to figure out. That you cannot marry a goy, and if you live with a guy and have a child, you go by the mom. So if it's a goyish lady, the kid's a guy, which we're all familiar with. This is the source. So the Gemara says, Shivcha Kananis Minon. How do I know the Kiddushin is not Taifis if a guy tries to marry a Shivcha Kananis? So Amar Avhuna, Amar Kra, Shvulachan Payim Achamar. The pasuk describes a Shivcha Kananis. The pasuk describes Goyim, and generally Goyim, but Shivcha Kananis as stay here with the donkey. Am Hadayim Elachamar. It's a nation that's similar to a donkey, the same way. This is Eliezer, so Eliezer is Eved Avram. So you see, an Eved is considered like a donkey, and the same way you can't be Mekadesh a donkey, so you can't be Mekadesh an Eved. Okay. Now, so that's the source that Kiddushin is not Taifis by a Shivcha Kananis. Go to the next page. How do I know that if you live with a Shivcha Kananis, so it's a Jewish dad, a non-Jewish mother, but not just a non-Jewish, Shivcha Kananis, how do I know that the baby is a guy? Minalan, Damar Kra, Ha'isha v'lideha tiel adeneha. The pasuk says the woman and her children should be to the master. The implication is her children are like her. She's a slave. Her children are slaves. They're not Jews. Okay, good. That's all by a goyish slave. How do I know a regular goyta? Stam. You want to mekadesh a guy. A guy wants to marry a guy into marriage, and he gives her a ring, and he says, "Harei mekadesh libetabasu." That's my shiv Yisrael. How do I know the Kiddushin is not toivus? And how do I know that when they have children together, the children are goyim as well? Menachos minon. Amakra loitis chatin bam. The pasuk says, "You shall not marry them." Now, by the way, this pasuk specifically is referring to the 7 umais, the Zayin umais. It's good to know. So we're going to go. The Gemara is going to ask in a little bit. How do I know this applies to all Goyim? Because this is talking about the 7 nations that lived in Israel when Yeshua entered it. Okay, but the pasuk says don't marry them, meaning you can't marry them. Okay. How do I know that's the Kiddushin is not typhus? How do I know that the child is a guy? So the answer is Rav Yochanan says in the name of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. The pasuk says right after this. It says Ki asir es bincha me'acharai. The pasuk says, okay, this part of the pasuk is referring to not a goyish mom, but a goyish dad. Meaning, the pasuk says 2 things: a Jewish boy should not marry a goyish lady. Then the pasuk says a Jewish girl should not marry a goyish guy. Why? Because when you have a grandchild from the Jewish mom and the Goyish guy is going to take him off the derech. Meaning, he's going to be a Jew, but he's going to be affected by his father. So the pasuk is referring to a case where the dad's a guy and the mom's a Jew, and it says, Yasser is bincha me'acharai. That bincha, your grandson, he's going to take him off the derech because he's going to go with his father instead to shul. He's going to go to church. What do you see though? He's a Jew. Meaning the pasuk is describing the scenario, saying, listen, if your son-in-law is a guy and your daughter's a Jew, and they have a baby, they're going to be a Jew, bincha. But he's going to take him off the derech. What do you see? You see, go by the mom. Ki yaser bincha me'acharai. Bincha abami Yisrael is karu bincha. That if your grandson comes from your daughter-in-law and she's a Jew, even though her husband is a guy, the child is a Jew. But the opposite, if the mom's a guy, then it's not a Jew anymore. You go with a Jew. When it comes to deciding whether you're a Jew or not, you go by the mom, not the dad. Okay? Amar Ravina, Shmamina, Ravina says, you do see from the sugya, ben bidcha haba min oivik kara bincha. Which means, you have a Jewish girl, she marries a guy, so your son-in-law is a guy, your grandchild is a Jew. Okay, fine. Now here's the kasha. I think we're all familiar with this. The question is he a mamzer? He's saying he's a Jew. Does that mean that he's a mamzer? Or is he a Jew stam? So the Gemara says, Neima kasav Ravina, should we assume that Ravina holds, Yisrael have a lot mamzer? Meaning, he's saying the kid's a Jew. Right? If the kid's a guy, he can't be a mamzer. And by the way, you'd rather be a guy than a mamzer, because a guy can always convert. A mamzer, there's no fixing that. So the Gemara says, you're telling me that if your son-in-law is a guy, if a Jewish woman has a baby with a guy, the child is a Jew. Does that mean that the child's a mamzer? So the Gemara says, no. Nehita kosher loyhave, mamzer loyhave. He's not kosher. He's not a mamzer. He's pasul, meaning he is pasul kahuna. By the way, that's the psak. If a Jewish girl has a baby with a goyish guy, the child is pasul kahuna, meaning we l'chachila do not marry them off to a guy. Correct. There's a machlekes or Moshe and Rav Avadia. What's the definition of b'diavad? Does it mean that if you actually had chuppah b'diavad, it works? I believe according to Rav Avadia, it's I forget which one says which. I don't want to say. Moshe and Rav Avadia argue. I forgot. I didn't think about it. The question is if they're engaged. In our terminology, engaged. No halachic marriage. They love each other, the kids. So one of the poskim are mekel because that's called b'diavad. The other poskim says no, they're not married yet. You should break it up. But again, that's where the dad's a guy. So the kid's a full-fledged Jew, but because his father's a guy, he's pasul. He's called pasul. He's pasul kahuna. Okay, fine. The source that Kiddushin is
still truma because it's not a marriage. She married a guy, but not really married.
Yeah, as long as she leaves him, she can't. Oh, meaning the son will prevent her from eating truma. Yeah, the son will prevent her from eating truma. Now, what's interesting is like this. We said before the source that Kiddushin is not typhus by a guy is because the pasuk says lo tischatin bam. The problem is lo tischatin bam is not referring to goyim specifically. It's referring to the 7 nations. Now, maybe, meaning in other words, maybe the pasuk is saying you can't marry them because you're supposed to murder them. But when it comes to an American, Spanish person, a French person, stam a guy, maybe Kiddushin is typhus. So the Gemara says hahu b'shiva goyim ksiv shar umas minayim. How do I know? So the Gemara says it's rational. Think about it. What does the pasuk say? Don't marry them. Why? Lo tischatin bam. Because the next word is ki yaser is bincha. If you marry them, it's going to take Jews off the derech. Meaning, well, you know what the problem with intermarriage is? Very simple. It destroys Klal Yisrael. Why? If it's a Jewish girl marrying a goyish guy, so the kid's a Jew, but the kid's going to go off the derech. That's a shanda. If it's the opposite, if it's a goyish girl and a Jewish guy, then he's going to be involved with a guy. The kids are going to be goyim, and he's going to have children that are goyim. Either way, it's going to destroy Klal Yisrael. There's no rational distinction between the Zayin Umais and Shar goyim. Yaser is bincha. The pasuk says it's going to take Jews off the derech. What does it matter whether it's Zayin Umais? Meaning, if the pasuk would have said, "Look, no, the pasuk is like tischatin bam." So you want to say, how do I know that this Isser is not just for them, it applies worldwide? Because the pasuk gives a reason for it. It doesn't say, because I said murder them. It says, ki yaser bincha, because it's going to take the Jewish people off the derech. Which it will, whether they're Kenani, Chivi, or French. Meaning we're going with the svara of the pasuk as opposed to just the words of the pasuk. No, we're darshaning the reason for it. mean, the pasuk says zayin umas you can't marry. There's two options. This could be because we're looking for the svara behind it. Either it could be because the pasuk says I told you to murder them, or because it's going to take Jews off the derech. Now, if that's the reason, then it should be applicable to Americans, to Canadians, to French. So the Gemara says, well, the pasuk says ki aser es bincha l'rabbis kol misir. Now, what you're referring to, you're a little confused by, is the fact it's a machlekes tanoim whether it's called doirish taima dekra. If you're doirish taima dekra, meaning if you go for the svara behind the pasuk, completely could apply it. But if you don't go with that, then you can't. So the Gemara says, ha nichal Rav Shimon, this interpretation follows Rav Shimon, the darish taima dekra, because Rav Shimon feels comfortable comparing the reason behind it. So according to Rav Shimon, you don't just go with the pasuk, you go with the svara behind it. The pasuk is saying you can't marry those goyim, and the pasuk is saying you want to know why, and that svara applies to French just as well as it applies to the chivis. But according to the Rabbanon, we don't go with svaras. We go with hard facts. The hard facts is the pasuk does not say it by the other nations. So my time that what's the source? So I'm akra another pasuk. A very good pasuk. The pasuk refers in the beginning of Kiseitze. The pasuk refers to a yefas toyer, right? Yefas toyer. It's pretty crazy now. Actually, I think about it. This going war. It's like these pasukim are different now. Yefas toyer means you go into and you take a woman captive. Yeah. What's the halach? What does the pasuk say? You bring her home. She mourns for 30 days. She converts. Then you can marry her. The implication is it's only Taifus Kiddushin because she converted. Before conversion, she's a guy. That doesn't work. So that's a pretty meaning. You can only marry her after she converts. The implication is that before she converts, you can't. Easy. So this is the source that by Goyim, Kiddushin is not Taifus. How do I know that it goes by the mom? We had a pasuk before, but now we're saying that pasuk, again, we're trying to always figure out two things. Kiddushin is not Taifus, and for lineage, you go by the mom. So we had a pasuk before that Kiddushin is not Taifus and you go by the mom. The problem was you tell me that pasuk is talking about the Zayin Umais. So how do I know it applies to other goyim? So we have a new pasuk that Kiddushin is not Taifus. So how do I know? So what's the source? No. Now, so you take an American girl and you try to marry her. Kiddushin is not Taifus. You have a baby with her. How do I know the kid's a guy? And we had a pasuk before, but that was Zayin Umais. So now we got to find the answer is the pasuk is describing a marriage. Again, it's a marriage that we don't like, but it's a marriage. And then the pasuk says you'll have a child. The implication is kol hecha de karina kisiena. Anytime the kedushin is typhus, karina b'vial delay, then it's your kid. Kol hecha delay karina kisiena. But if a kedushin is not typhus, meaning it's a gaita, you marry a gaita, the kedushin is not typhus, like karina b'vial delay, then it's not your kid. It's her kid, meaning kid's a guy. Okay, so here's the deal, though. Let's go back. We started this daf, this amid, by finding a source that if you live with a shivcha, Kiddushin is not typhus, and the kid's a guy also. Fine. We just had a pasuk, though, that applies to all guyim. I could apply that pasuk to shivcha also, rendering the pasuk by shivcha free. I no longer need a pasuk for shivcha and the average guy. That svara, that pasuk that we just quoted, which is, it's a universal pasuk. Anytime the kedusha is not typhus by a guy, the child is a guy. So then I don't need a pasuk by shivcha anymore. So the Gemara says, Ihachi shivcha nami. The answer is enechanami. You're right. The pasuk by shivcha is now extra. So now what do we do with that pasuk by a shivcha? The answer is, look at the Tanya. We use it for something else. This pasuk, this brisa is referring to a different concept. It has nothing to do with kedushin typhus, and it doesn't have to do with whose child is whose. It's rather the following: you have a non-Jewish shivcha who's pregnant, and you say to her, "Hareyat baschayrin v'ladach eved." Here's what you tell her. You say, "Listen, you're free, but the baby's mine." Now the question is that a doable thing? I mean, she's pregnant, and you're saying, listen, I'm willing to free you, but your baby inside of you, I want to keep him as a slave. So do we look at the baby as a complete separate entity, that's a doable possibility, or no? The baby goes with the mom. So what did the pasuk say? Ha'isha v'ledeha ti'aladeneha. The mom and the babies are together. Meaning, so it doesn't work. The Gemara says, Havlad kamaisa. Div Rav Yosef. Basically, it says you can't separate the mom and the baby. You free the mom, the baby's automatically free. The fetus is automatically free. Chum say no. Dvar of kayamin. The Chum say no. Why can't you separate it? I'm freeing the mom. I'm not freeing the fetus. And what's their source? Ha'isha v'ledeha ti'aladeneha, because the mom and the baby are together. What are that? The opposite. They're saying that you could separate the mom and the baby. Why would this be a pasuk for them? My Talmuda. Amar Rav Rav Yosef Glili. The answer is no. This pasuk is backing up Rav Yosef Glili. Meaning, Rav Yosef Glili's shita is the mom and the baby are always together. You free the mom, baby's automatically free. There's no way to keep the baby's slavery if you're freeing the mom, assuming it's a fetus. How do I know this? Because the mom and the baby are one unit. They'll both be slaves or they'll both be free. That's what the pasuk is referring to. All right, we'll stop it.